Hi, I'm Kevin Rollins. Welcome to another episode of Technology, Economics, and Learning. Today I'm going to talk about a tool called Processwire, which is a content management system. And recently I've been rebuilding my website, kevinrollins.com, using Processwire. And I think that it has some functionality that's a little bit beyond what we might expect from something like WordPress, for instance. And you can actually do quite a bit of business object modeling, which is kind of cool. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's get into the slideshow and let's get going here. So here on the first slide, I have a screenshot of the Processwire website. One thing to say about Processwire is they have a great community and a wonderful set of documentation of the tool. They also have quite a bit. There's quite a bit of an API, software API, that is very powerful, and I think you can do a lot more than you might realize at first. So we'll get into that. Let's go and look at the agenda for today's talk. I'm going to start out by talking about something that I'm putting all over my website. It's part of my branding. It's part of my consulting business. It's sort of, maybe you could say it's my catchphrase. And that is that everything is a learning process. Now that's a kind of a model. We're modeling these different things we might go do as a learning process. But I think it really fits, and it's really helpful to think about things that way. In this particular case, looking at the tool of Processwire and learning how to use it, that is a learning process, obviously. But if we start to model our business decisions and are we going to invest in learning this tool, looking at what it costs to figure out and learn is something that's important. And that's why we're also going to talk a little bit about the engineering log and why keeping track of what we're doing as we're going through a learning process is really useful and important. So then I will actually get into Processwire itself, and we'll do build a simple model of a to-do list, of a to-do and a to-do list, and we will add authorization, and then we will create a customized to-do list based upon which user is logged in. And then we'll go a little further in showing how you can add really granular permissions to a Processwire object. At the end of the talk, I'll think a little bit about how can we expand our thinking from this little to-do list item to more general business use cases, and how far would it be reasonable to go with it, and in what circumstances would it be really reasonable to use Processwire as a tool for solving your business problem. So, more on everything is a learning process. The show is called Technology, Economics, and Learning, and the second two parts of that are Economics and Learning. And so we think about a business case for using Processwire relying on sort of what you get right out of the box, and then what is relatively easy to do with a certain amount of learning. And we think about it in terms of what is the effort to use it, and what is the effort to learn how to use it. And we can think about these three different levels. So, first, what can you do straight off that is sort of built into the web interface, what actions you can take within that web interface. Then we go to the API and we say, what functions can you immediately call that have already been written and they know they work pretty well because they've totally debugged them, and you can get a lot of functionality at that API level. And what does it take to learn how to use that? And then we're going to look at, how do you hook into the system and how do you add your own functions? And so that's a sort of a third level, and customizing Processwire to make it do what you want to do. And so each of those things, as an economic proposition, it has a cost and then it has a benefit. And to think about what the balance of those two things are, I think should help a person, either one who is a developer who wants to learn how to use it, or if you're a business manager and you're going to put this as a tool in your business, what you might expect your staff to go through. And so that might help you think about what they're dealing with, and also to talk to them about the process of using all the functionality of some tool, and also thinking about as time progresses, we give ourselves some time to learn, and as time progresses, we get more benefit from that. So with that being said, it's very important to document the learning process. In preparing for this talk, I was making notes in a text file, and as I wanted to debug the examples that I was going to show, I actually have quite a few notes. Over the course of a couple of days, I was working on this, and I think the total time was maybe 5 or 6 hours, but that was broken up over several days. But as I went through it, I kept track of, what I was going to try to do, and then review, how well these different things I tried worked. To some degree, it's a history of my understanding of how Processwire works. And I certainly think I learned a lot, both in building my website, but then also in making the preparations for this video. I think in general, it's great to keep a log. I have friends who work for corporations and government projects, and they say that sometimes they don't come up with a finalized thing. They don't have a working product necessarily, but what they can do is take their engineering log and show it to their boss and say, well, hey, this is what I found out by going through a series of steps. I wasn't just sitting around doing nothing. And I think also that's another thing for if you are in a startup or if you're just building your own project, to at least to have that artifact for yourself to prove to yourself at least that you weren't just messing around. I think it's also it's a really great way to keep track of sidebar items. So you have your sort of main questions that you're asking, trying to move down the field to get something done. But then you have these sort of secondary or non-directly related ideas that are interesting, but they're not directly related. So the sidebar questions, put them in the log, and maybe even put the word sidebar. Use the word sidebar to make clear to your own self or anyone else reading it that you don't necessarily think that's in the main line, and don't get too distracted with it. And actually, I have a sidebar slide here, so we'll have a good example of let's not get too distracted with this other thing. And I think finally, just again to put the cap on this learning process business, that when we are going through, every time we're doing this, every time we're building something, hey, every time I'm making one of these videos, I tell myself, it is just another iteration of the learning process. It's not necessarily the final version, the best version, the way I'm going to think about this in 5 years. It's what I know today, and it sort of opens the door for us to just say, this is what we got right now, this is what we're going forward with, and to not worry about it too much. And so with that being said, let's get into Processwire. So, Processwire, it is technically thought of as a content management system, a CMS, just like WordPress. But is it just a way to manage a blog? And I think that, in making this comparison, I've also added Ruby on Rails here, because Ruby on Rails or some other full stack framework, you can kind of build whatever you can imagine as an enterprise project. I don't know that you would want to build anything possible that you could with Ruby on Rails and Processwire, but surely you can out of the box build a lot more easily than you could with like WordPress. Because really the main issue is that Processwire models everything as sort of this object. It's called a page, but really it's just an object. And you can build these objects in the back end. And a couple of years ago, one of the early times I used Processwire, I had a non-technical client who needed a website immediately. And so there he is, he's putting models and data in the models in the system while I'm working on the code at the next computer over to him. And again, at 2 a.m. with 15 minutes of instruction, he was able to do that. So that's, I think, a really important part of the sales pitch for Processwire. So to repeat, we have these page objects, and the idea of a page in Processwire is that each page is an instance of a template. So the template is the model, and the page is the instance of it. So if you were in Ruby on Rails, model view controller, this is the model, And so if you have a dog model, you can have 6 different dogs with different names and different walking speeds and different loudnesses of barks. And those are fields in the model. And so each of those dogs is a different instance of the object. And so the page is the instance in this case. Again, just that's a sort of a terminological, detail, but I think it's really important for how we're thinking about this. So each template consists of specific fields of content, and that can be text fields or Boolean true falses. It could be images. It could be files. There's quite a few. If you go and install Processwire, and you can look at the fields menu and see the kind of things you can create, and there's already a whole bunch of fields ready for your use. To understand that a template is the data model, so it's a set of fields that are mapped in the database, and then each template has a PHP file which basically has a presentation in it. So it's a function that spits out some rendering of those fields, and that can be more detailed or less detailed, but we won't get into that at the moment. An important internal design note to make about how Processwire actually works is in the MySQL database, there's a pages table, and then there is a table for each field. And so when you look up the field, you have the page ID, and you have the data, which is of the type that you've set that field to be. And so that's how it works. I think really importantly, it's sort of an interesting detail, a page can also hold references to other pages. And just to put that in way for now, but it's something we will use in this talk, and I think it's kind of an interesting concept. But let's get further into it here. Let's see. So our task today is to create a restricted to-do item. And it's a simple task, and it's a sort of a standard tutorial kind of thing to do, is build a to-do list. To motivate this, I've created a use case, which is we have to imagine here for a second, that a Processwire website is being developed. How exciting. And the content of this site is under review. And so we imagine there's a manager who's reviewing the content, reviewing the layout, is going through the website, the Processwire website, and says, oh, we've got to fix something here on this page. So that he or she can take the page and click on add child, and we can add the to-do right to that page. That's the first use case feature we want. And then we also want a listing for every employee, so when they log in, they can go to their My To-Dos page and see a listing of all the to-dos that have been assigned for them. So that's what we're going to accomplish here with our use case. We have a 4-step process to getting this done. The first step, the zeroth step, which is install Processwire, we're not going to get into much detail. I'm going to, sort of hand wave over that because we assume that's already done. We're going to add the to-do template. We're going to create and add fields for that template. And then we are going to do something with the roles menu, add an employee role, and we're going to set the to-do template only to display for people who have that role. So these are sort of this is the first thing we're doing, is building that restricted to-do. So the zeroth step here, and again, this is just an outline. The main thing here of this is that you obviously have to go get a lamp host. You could do this on your own computer if you have a lamp stack installed. Go and read the instructions of how to do it. It's not that hard, but it's worth reading the instructions first before you go through the process. This slide's kind of for the ultimate newbie who has never done anything like this before. And so, people who've never done this before haven't gone through these steps, and each of these things you'd have to learn how to do, and they're not that hard, but they are things you have to learn. And again, if you're a business manager and you have a person who is technically skilled, but maybe has not done this particular task before, they may have to learn these things, and so that's part of the cost of their learning. You SSH into the server, you CD to the public HTML directory, you use wget and pull the archive from processwire.com, you unzip it, you do some file permissions twiddling to make the permissions correct, and then you go back to the browser and you hit that web page and you go through the steps that are described there. It's all described in the reading instructions, but again, we won't go into too much detail here. But that's sort of a general thing when you ever install some LAMP stack app like WordPress or something. Just a quick sidebar. Again, this is more learning that someone would have to do to really do this kind of stuff effectively. Here's some Linux commands. Here they're all highlighted. And again, you can get into this in your own time. This isn't a sidebar. So moving forward, by the way, I'll have to say that this whole slide deck will be on kevinrollins.com. If you go to the Technology, Economics, and Learning project on that page, each episode will be linked there, and there will be a file to download of these slides. So now on to the main course here, adding the to-do template. It's real simple. There's basically 2 steps to creating a new template. In your terminal application through SSH, you need to add a blank file. It doesn't have to be blank, but it's fine that it's blank. And a good Linux command for adding a blank file is touch, and then you basically put it in this site templates directory. So if you ran the command in your terminal window, touch site templates to do.php, the file has been created. And then when you go into the setup menu of the web application for Processwire, and you go to add new templates, you'll see here these are the listed files that are inside that directory and that have not been assigned a template already. And this state JSON and slideshow old, those are from other projects that have nothing to do with this, but they were just sort of sitting there in the folder. We want to click this to do thing, and then it will connect that PHP file to this to do model that we are creating here in the admin system. So here is an example I created for my to do. I created this work description field, and it's a text field. I'm sorry, I skipped a step here. So once we've created the to do, we need to go over and to the fields menu. So again, it's also under setup, and there's fields, and we have to add the fields that are going to go into the template, and then we're going to add the fields to the template. So that's where this. So we need a template sort of to be available for us, and then we're going to create some fields, and we're going to add them to them. You could actually add this template after we created the fields completely. They're not dependent on each other, but we do need the fields to add to the template, which we're going to do here in a second. So here is the work description field, which is you can see here is a text field. And then we have a different kind of field here. This is this interesting page reference field. And for our to-dos, we have this assigned to piece of data. And the idea is that we're going to be able to assign to-dos to particular employees. On the assigned to field, we also have, because it's a page reference, we also have other detailed settings we can make inside of the field's creation tabs. And you can go and edit them afterwards. And of course, this details tab sort of depends upon what kind of field it is. And so Processwire has a lot of sort of dependent aspects. And as you play around with it, you'll see how much there really is to configure in it. And you don't have to learn all of that configuration off the bat, but it's worth knowing that it's in there. And so if you want to do something more elaborate than sort of what is sort of given out of the box, you'll probably find a setting for it in one of these tabs under, there's a number of different things here. And then, but we won't get into all that right now. So anyway, I just want to point out that that there's a bunch of stuff there that you might not realize at first exists. In this, again, looking at this page reference configuration, in this case, we're restricting the kinds of pages you can put in the page reference field for assigned to. We're going to say user. We want to be able to select a user because a user is a kind of a page in the Processwire system. But we also want to make available roles. And so if we want to say a group of people, a group of users, in this case, we're going to make it employees. All employees can do something. And so we want to be able to assign that for it to do. We're going to say, we want Joe to work on it, or we might want to say we want this employee group to work on it, or we want the programming group to work on this, or we want the design group, for instance. And you can, in your mind, you might think forward to other business cases where if you are creating certain kinds of functionality or linkings, you want to say this is related to this part of the business, and it doesn't have to be necessarily people. It could be some other business process. Anyways, we won't get into that just right now. Moving forward, so this is what it looks like in the to-do template. I've added all these fields here, and you can see that we have work description and a description of what work description is, which is work to be done, and that's a text field. Priority, which is an integer. We have assigned to, which is that page reference we're talking about. And then I have some fields for estimated iterations and actual iterations, which is basically how much time, how many sessions is it going to take to sit down and get this done. And then, in fact, at the end, how long did it take to get it done? And then we have a Boolean at the bottom here that this to-do is completed. So again, there's different ways we could have made this model. This is just one way. But again, it's just an example of how, now we've created a business model for to-do, and that's pretty much created. So now we can move on to that next step. That first two steps in terms of basically creating the template and adding the fields took me, as I was doing it, all of 10 minutes. That was how easy it was. The next step is not really much harder, and again, once you know how to do this, it's really easy to restrict some template. So basically, there's two steps here. One, we create a role called employees, and that's basically just a label. It's nothing more than just a text field that says employees, and it has its own page. Basically, once you do that, you can add that role. It's a role, and you can add that role to any user, and then they will have the permissions that an employee has. And so then we go over to the to-do template, and we basically allow the employees to do certain things that you can see the guest is not allowed to do. They can view pages, edit pages, create pages, and add children to those pages, to the to-dos. And that basically the to-dos are only going to show up for the employee and the super user, who had the admin user. So basically, we've basically created and restricted to-dos. All right, I think this video is running a little bit long. So the simple solution is just to cut it into two parts, and this will be the end of part one. In part two, I think we'll get into some PHP coding actually. We're going to write the template code to display our to-dos. Then we'll make the list for showing the customized to-do list for each user. And then finally, we'll go into the hooking system in Processwire to see how we can add functionality. And I think that will be quite interesting, and you'll see how powerful Processwire is. But for now, thanks for listening, and we hope you'll check back in with part two. Thanks so much.